you have to make tradition relevant, and you have to make the knowledge relevant. And relevance doesn't work without knowledge, and knowledge doesn't work without relevance.
Welcome to Something in the Water. I'm Rachel, and this is my podcast about Budapest's Jewish community through interviews with the individuals who shape it. Thank you for being here. We are recording on April 16th, 2026. Today, I'm pleased to have Szonja Komoróczy with us to discuss herself and her contributions to the community here in Budapest. Szonja is an academic, a yiddishist, and a historian, and involved in the local Jewish community here in Budapest. As an educator, her passion is to tell the story behind the facts, and as a tour guide, to show the stories behind various layers of a city or region, historical, social, architectural, alike. Szonja is currently the vice director of the Jewish University here in Budapest and teaches university courses there and at Central European University in Vienna. Szonja, thank you for coming to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'll ask to start, what was Jewish life like in Hungary when you were growing up?
There depends on which period of my growing up we are talking about. But my active memories of Jewish life really started after the fall of communism.
Okay.
I did attend a couple of Kol Nidre services or Seder nights with my dad earlier, but as my active part started when communism ended. And it was an extremely interesting life of sudden burst of energy, of basically high school and university students trying to start life or trying to start something, trying to figure out together who they were or what it meant to be Jewish.
Before the fall of the Iron Curtain, did your family relate to Judaism in any way in the home?
No.
Were you aware that you had this background?
I don't have any specific recollections of. I mean, there were a lot of points that later on make sense, but all these points connected, or I connected the points. Probably there were connections between the points, but I connected the points retrospectively. One of the big things was in 91 when the first groups of Hungarian youth started going to Israel for a couple of weeks of volunteering in a kibbutz and then doing the tour. Then it wasn't just a 10-day taglit type of thing, but there was that 10-day tour thing plus 3 or 4 weeks of volunteering. And when you suddenly realize that all your friends are going on these tours, and then you suddenly start understanding that, your whole friendship group or your parents' friendship group are all somehow Jewish. So it's sort of it was there, but it wasn't there, and the realization came in many ways at that point.
I think Zsuzsa also told us about these trips in the early years of Jewish life in Hungary, that for her, that was also when it was sure that she felt Jewish.
I mean, for me, that my trip to Israel was definitely the thing that changed a lot of things. But also my dad is an academic and was involved in the beginning of Jewish studies in Hungary, so it was there, but you don't, was it there because that's what he's doing? Is that the reason why, or is there, it wasn't really clear.
I mean, I guess there was Judaism as a profession or as a area of study, not as a way of life or a religion.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Okay, interesting. So today you're obviously an academic, among other things. What kind of example did he set for you as an academic in the area of Jewish studies?
Um, until, well, I cannot set a date, but until fairly long, I thought that what I was doing in Jewish studies, in academic Jewish studies, was a revolution against my dad, which, I mean, now I cannot say without giggling. But my dad started out as an ancient Near East historian of the ancient Near East, a Syriologist. And as a historian of the ancient Near East, he was involved with Hebrew Bible studies as well. And when I got into Jewish studies, I consciously tried to ignore as much as the curriculum let me ignore the ancient part and try to concentrate on the modern part. So me becoming a yiddishist was also like a dafka thing that I am not interested in. Whatever Assyrian kings reign, I'm interested in modern stuff. So he probably did set a lot of examples. I mean, he definitely did. But it's really interesting how unconscious I was about it. And retrospectively, it's really interesting. And as a teenager, it wasn't like we'd never, teenager or early university years, we didn't really speak about academic stuff, even though I was a student at a very small department of Jewish studies where he was the head of department. We never really spoke about such things. Like we somehow kept our various segments of our lives separate. And it was only when I was already doing my doctorate at Oxford, and he came to visit for a couple of months. Like every year, he would come for a month or 2 months to work in the libraries there and stay at my apartment. When we first started speaking about like work, so like that was a fair. Like by then, I was doing my PhD in Jewish studies or in Yiddish, and that was really the first point when we actually started to work together to discuss matters that are important for both of us. So,
do you feel like he was open to learning in what ways you were engaging with Jewish studies in different ways than he was?
In many ways, yes, and in many ways, no. And it is often still a tension between us that I became really active in the Jewish community, and Judaism became a part of my everyday life, religious as well as cultural community. And he tried to tell me in the beginning and try to convinced me that one shouldn't mingle private life with work life, and I cannot be a real researcher if I'm an insider, and I should keep my distance from my topic. And he still teases me with that, but I mean, he's there on my Seder, so.
I mean, you're not the only person that has some moments of revolution against their father. Yeah, I mean, I understand that you both follow the model of an academic and do not follow the model as a traditional academic. So we'll talk about that. I'm interested in your work with Yiddish. I went to a Jewish day school that still teaches Yiddish, and people have differing views on the value of that. Why is Yiddish important to you?
Well, the way I got involved with Yiddish was actually an absolute accident. When I was first year undergraduate, there was a 2-hour gap in my schedule, and it was on, I don't even remember which morning, when the main libraries in the city center were closed. So I was like, okay, I either spend it in a cafe or I look for some course that might be interesting or vaguely interesting. And I was doing my first year undergrad, majoring, double or triple majoring, basically in English studies, German studies, and Jewish studies. Language was always something that I learned easily, and I loved. I always enjoy learning a new language. So, and there was this beginner's course on Yiddish, and I went in and I fell in love with the teacher's personality, as well as the language. So that's how it all started. So in that way, it is an accident that I became a Yiddishist. But also, I had a couple of professors here in Budapest as well. One of them died recently, a linguist, Ádám Nádasdy, who was one of the most formative characters in my academic life, who was also, as a linguist, a non-Jewish linguist, became interested in Yiddish as a language. So, there were a lot of impulses towards Yiddish, and also I felt that I'm doing my revolution against my dad, and I'm doing something totally different. And I learned to understand that by having learned Yiddish, I got access to materials on Hungarian Jews that no one had ever touched before, and aspects of Hungarian Jewish history that had been a logged box to researchers before. So I basically found the niche there. And I think it is extremely important, and I'm very passionate about that whoever deals with European Jewish heritage, or whoever wants to be conscious of any segment of Ashkenazi Jewish heritage, you have to be conscious of Yiddish in some way. Either if you have access to it, then learn the language, know the literature, amazing Yiddish literature of the interwar years, and also other periods, but that's absolutely world-class literature that no one reads. But it's also so deep in every little segment of our tradition that it gives us a lot broader understanding if we are conscious about that.
Cool. So Yiddish, understanding the language, or maybe languages in general, but in this case, Yiddish can act as a window or gateway into aspects of history or culture that we might not be able to see if not for an understanding of the language?
Yes, definitely. So, obviously there is the material that is written in Yiddish, and if you want to research it, you have to understand it. But also in our everyday Jewish lives, there are things that if you know Yiddish or know about Yiddish or know about the whole situation of being multilingual in a world, especially in our very non-multilingual world, it gives us an absolutely different window of how rabbinical texts are formed, how our prayers are formed, how our traditions are growing and changing with times. And I really do think that knowing Yiddish and knowing about Yiddish, or knowing about how Yiddish came to be and how it existed, helps add an extra really interesting layer to that.
So can you help me explain why my Jewish day school should continue to have Yiddish in the classroom? For kids, not for academics, not for religious people necessarily. But for people to become proud Jews.
I think it is a very hard issue to teach languages to kids. And it depends on what element of day school you're speaking of and what linguistic surrounding you're speaking about. In a very monolingual English sounding, I think it is extremely important to become aware and become comfortable become aware of and comfortable with using various languages. And if you do that with your own heritage. If you are somewhere else, there too, to learn Jewish languages in general, and keep that type of tradition alive, add that element to your conscious identity. It is there. It is there in our music. It is there in a lot of words all generations use, but especially the parents and grandparents' generation, to understand that you have to have an element of cultural language knowledge. Maybe you are never going to discuss, or very few of school kids will end up learning enough Yiddish to discuss philosophical matters or read high literature of the 1920s. But that's not the only part. And yes, only probably a small segment of people are going to look at archival letters of whatever 19th century, early 20th century Yiddish stuff. But it's not just that. It is so deep in our identity, and also to preserve this whole idea of being an Ashkenazi Jew. It's a part of it.
I know so few people that speak Yiddish fluently. One friend of mine who's a grandson of 4 Holocaust survivors who speaks Yiddish fluently, who has some funny stories of like overhearing Hasidic families speaking Yiddish and then saying something and then being completely shocked that he has any idea what they're saying. I feel like it's an aspect of my Jewishness that I'm proud of, that I can't speak Yiddish, but that I had this chapter of my life where we were engaging with Yiddish stories that I guess is just an opportunity that not many people have. Do you have people in your life that you are speaking Yiddish with in informal ways? Or these days, is it more of a research tool for you, aspect of your identity to connect to more areas of Jewish history and Jewish life?
Well, there aren't really Yiddish speakers in Hungary. So in that sense, I don't have everyday Yiddish conversations. Also, Yiddish is today the spoken language of Hasidic Jews, and only a small segment of Hasidic Jews. And I'm not a Hasidic Jew, so I also don't have that of an everyday language in my life. But I do have friends and former professors who became friends from whom I studied Yiddish or with whom I studied Yiddish. And whenever we have any conversations, whether on chat or email or video calls, it doesn't even pop up in our mind to not speak Yiddish. So,
cool.
like, even though we share like 2-3 other languages, so in that sense, there is that part of the Yiddishist world who don't live in a Yiddish-speaking environment, for whom it is a conscious but obvious choice to speak Yiddish and only Yiddish among each other.
Very cool. It's part of your Jewish identity in some way.
Yes, it is part of my... I mean, in that sense, it's also part of an academic identity. Because all these friends with whom I speak Yiddish are my academic friends and colleagues. So it's not a part of my... Speaking Yiddish is not a part of my everyday Jewish identity. But at the same time, Yiddish is a part of all of our identity, whether we are conscious or not. So that's also really interesting, that if you walk around in the community and various segments of the community, to be able to use those specific Yiddish terms that everyone uses, to be able to use them properly, that sort of places you somewhere within the community. That gives it a level of authenticity, which is, I think, extremely interesting in the Hungarian setting, where most of us who are active in the Jewish world today did not grow up being active in the Jewish world today. So we are sort of newcomers or new returner, well, whatever. I consciously don't want to use the Baal Tshuva term, but we are all in a way newcomers to Jewish identity. And in that point where you can use stuff in an authentic way, as I think that's really important. And that's sort of one of the parts that sets a division line between those who really want to understand and those who don't want to understand.
If you're describing newcomers to Jewish life, everything that's happening in some ways is conscious if it's something that's happening later in life. And then I guess, yeah, there's different levels of that.
And also whether, I mean, if you want to pick up the strings that had been dropped a generation, 2 generations, or 3 generations earlier, you have to be able to see the stuff you want to pick up and continue. So in that sense, I really think that some level of Yiddish is compulsory for an Ashkenazi Jewish life. And then how deep you go depends also on your interests, your linguistic abilities. And yeah, I don't want to sound arrogant because I learn languages easily and I know that not everyone does so, but still it's I think it's a part of it's a part of us. And like, I mean, in my ideal world, everyone would be multilingual as Jews used to be in the Ashkenazi world. So I know how for a monolingual mind it is mind-blowing to be conscious of the fact that you don't dream in your mother tongue. You can actually dream in 4 or 5 languages. You don't count in your mother tongue. You can actually instinctively count in several languages. And like all those things that are usually taken as facts were not facts in the Jewish world for centuries, basically.
I guess you do some translation work between these 5 languages that you speak. How has the work of translation influenced your thinking as an academic also?
With translation, I think one of the most important things is to understand that languages work differently. They have different structures. So you don't want to translate word for word or sentence for sentence. You have to get the meaning in order to translate, or it's in order to transfer the meaning. And I think looking at texts and seeing that on, like, if you take a text and translate it word for word, letter for letter into another language, and then you put it away for a day, and then you look at it again, and it doesn't make any sense. So that process of understanding how, in many ways, languages have context and parts of an identity that might not be shared with other languages. So which is if you are multilingual, then that's something that's that you know, whether consciously or unconsciously, but you would never use a certain language in a certain situation, or would never use a certain word in that, or there are certain words that you cannot translate into the other language. Like that, those are like.
When you are teaching about sociolinguistics in Hungary, in the UK, in Israel, in Austria, also, what's it like to be teaching about Hungarian history and culture in these other places? And how has that also maybe like translating what's happening here into these other communities? What's that been like for your development?
I think very similar to languages. All of understanding history, understanding politics. I mean, you've lived here, so you also see that if you read the facts, but until you get the context or you get the vibe, you get a totally different feeling and you don't get a deep understanding of what's happening. So for me, the context is always extremely important in trying to understand or help people understand or work towards an understanding of a topic.
And what about living in different communities and teaching in different languages? How has your Jewish identity been impacted by time in these different cities around the world?
Obviously, my Jewish identity has shaped, and especially my priorities have changed significantly, living in various countries and becoming part of Jewish communities in various countries. And my world has definitely become broader. And yeah, I think my priorities have significantly shifted. I cannot even remember. I mean, probably I can force myself to remember but I definitely cannot imagine what would have happened had I stayed in Hungary doing my graduate and postgraduate studies and not lived elsewhere for months and years. Regarding my Jewish life, I mean, I know what I did before I started moving around, but it definitely opened several new worlds to me. Learning to become active members of other communities.
I'm going through that similar process in the last few years.
Yeah, I think, you understand yourself a lot better as well, and you understand what's important for you or what gives you a connection.
Can you think back to something that you prioritized in a different place at a different time in your life compared to now?
There are probably too many to pinpoint, but there is one of the things that I very strongly remember was my first high holiday services, not in the same synagogue, not in the only synagogue that I had known before. When I got to Oxford, and I was suddenly not in the one, and it wasn't just Hungarian synagogue. There was one specific synagogue I used to go to. And suddenly I get to somewhere else, and the melodies are different. People behave differently, and how I was missing what I was used to. And then that's like high holidays, was the beginning of the academic year. And how I learned to love that. And then when I came back, to appreciate that it's not that one element of the service or that voice of the one cantor or the sermon of the one rabbi or the specific people I'm around with, but it's a broader type of experience. And in that sense, like, it sounds very cliche, but the Jewish peoplehood type of a feeling that you understand that it's not just the miniature sensory things, but something broader. So it's not like specific examples, but it's a
feeling.
It's a feeling, yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so when we had a coffee not that long ago, you explained that you were taught to be an academic inside the Ivory Tower, and at some point took a step away from the Ivory Tower. I want to understand how you have gone against the traditional academic path and how those involvements in the community have impacted your thinking, your work.
We have sort of hinted at that with regarding the relationship with my father and his background, which it is a tension that if you're an academic, you deal with texts, or if you're an academic in humanities, you deal with texts, you deal with reading, writing, texts, and research, and because I became a part of the community for various parallel reasons. And what was happening is that in class, I was studying biblical Hebrew, I was studying rabbinics, I was studying Jewish history. And then on Shabbat, I was there in the synagogue where they were reading the text that I was studying in academic class. And so many other parallels like that, which in the case of many academics who actually managed to do what my dad tried to convince me to do, to draw the separation line between life and work, they don't bring academic studies out to their everyday life. And what happened for me is that eventually being a part of the Jewish community and doing active research in Jewish studies, I felt uncomfortable with the two worlds being separate. So I started bringing one to the other, and it was a bilateral influence, actually. So my everyday life, started influencing my academic work, and my academic work was one of the things that, being active in the community, I felt I started feeling an ever-growing responsibility that I have this knowledge. So the Jewish world or Jewish everyday life needs knowledge. It's such a knowledge-centered culture. So I started getting more and more involved in informal Jewish education, or not just academic university type of Jewish education.
So how does someone with an academic background connect your studies, your expertise with Jewish high school, for example? I know you've been a teacher at the Jewish high school in Budapest and also the director of Jewish studies. How do you connect these two worlds?
When the first class that I taught in high school, I think that was the first year that was the most challenging year I ever had. And I think I learned a lot more from the students than they did from me. And simply those 4 years that I was a little bit more than 5 years that I was teaching in high school have changed my approach to learning in many, many ways. One of the things that I think is extremely important is or became ever more important to me, is to understand that it's not just facts, that you have to get the relevance and the passion and integrity in order for something to work in an educational setting. If you do an academic text study of the Bible, then you want to understand the phrases the Bible uses, the exact grammar, the historical context. And if you teach it in a high school, or if you teach it in a community setting, you want the text to become relevant. And I think that's a very important point to understand, that you have to make tradition relevant, and you have to make the knowledge relevant. And relevance doesn't work without knowledge, and knowledge doesn't work without relevance once you leave the ivory tower of academia.
Is there any program or something that's happened in the community that you're proud of, that you feel like your contribution from taking a step from the academic world into the community has reassured you that this works and this is meaningful to the community?
I think there are a lot of there are a lot of similar or things that would fit into this category, but I think the thing that I spoke most passionately about when we had the coffee a few weeks ago was one of the programs that we started at the Louder School, which is a high school a counseling program or informal educational program where high schoolers go into elementary school and teach or do Jewish stuff, informal educational stuff with the kids, and how understanding the multi-levels of what it brings to all the generations and frameworks, and to manage that, how you can get high schoolers to be responsible for 20 plus kids on a weekly level, how you can have teenagers to commit to waking up earlier and getting to school earlier, and how that changes the small kids' attitude to what it means to do Jewish stuff, how it changes the relationship between small kids and big kids, and what it means to let it go. And that's sort of my academic part, that if I want to control what they do, then or over control what they do, then it's not going to work out as good as if I let go. And I think that's also very important. There's a really, really important balance that I've been passionate of trying to help the community find that balance of knowledge and letting it go, or empowerment, or basically.
So, like equipping people with knowledge and then also giving them the freedom to do what they want with that.
Yes.
And we talked about how, the fact that this is happening first thing in the morning, which is when kids' brains are a sponge, and that we can provide them with the Jewish community at that time is so lucky for these kids that they don't need to jump straight to math class.
I mean, I felt really passionate about this program for several reasons, and also it is a challenging thing to work in a community where the vast majority of the community is not even really a community, because they're not conscious of their Jewish heritage also meaning a communal framework. So they're not used to doing Jewish stuff every day in their lives. It might be somewhere in the back of their head. And when kids come to a Jewish school in Hungary, the vast majority of kids don't come to the Jewish school because they want to study in a Jewish school. They come to the Jewish school for other reasons, because it's a good school, because whatever. There are various reasons they do that, but it's not the family's need to give a Jewish framework. So it's a very secular community and very non-connected community, non-community community in a way. And in that setting, to understand that whatever we do in our lives, we don't jumpstart our days. And kids shouldn't jumpstart their days either. And if you can provide a Jewish framework for that, which doesn't have to be a math lesson, it doesn't have to be a, reading lesson or a sport lesson, but it's sort of a soft landing in between home and, yes, breakfast or no breakfast, but mommy's surrounding to schoolwork. It's sort of a soft landing into school, and then they can start working. It's also not that much the sponge thing, because, or the sponge thing is, they're sponges. Like period. Kids are sponges, period. Maybe except for post-lunch and pre-bedtime period, but they're sponges. But to give them a framework where it's an obvious thing that you do something that's community, to do that you're a part of something broader than your strict classroom thing. And that works for the high schoolers as well, that it's not you go in and then you have classes. You have community responsibilities. You have a framework that's not just the exact stuff you have to produce in order to graduate.
Yeah, makes the Jewish relevant too. Like, it's serving purposes that make people feel part of something, not just like they have to go to their Jewish studies class. Like, it's much more than that.
And in many ways, community, like functioning big communities, usually have an understanding of this, that being Jewish doesn't just mean that you turn up for Friday night services with random people standing next to you, or Saturday morning services. It means a commitment, an interest in each other, a care for each other, which has been present in Jewish life for the past centuries, with all the frameworks of societies that are the society of taking care of the sick, the society of learning Talmud, the society of marrying off poor brides, etc. There are like various frameworks in traditional Jewish society that meant a lot more than just ticking the box that I did my prayers this morning. It's not just that. it's a lot broader thing, and that's, I think, one of the challenges Hungarian Jewish community activists have to tackle to convince people to be involved. And involvement can mean a lot of things and a lot of layers, and one needs involvement in social life, in psychological care, in friendships, in study and prayer and food and music and fun and leisure and whatever. So all the elements have to become this patchwork. And that's the challenge now in Hungary, that you have to find all these pieces of the patchwork and match them together.
Are the frameworks for that in the making right now?
I think a lot of things are in the making, yes. And I think it's a really interesting process that there was a big boom of looking for Jewish identities and a big revival after the fall of communism. And now we are, I don't even want to count how many years past that. Well, 37, but still a lot of years past that. So basically we are a generation later. And it is extremely interesting to see that what has worked, what has stayed, and what's still missing. And I think it is the past couple of years that there have been a lot of initiatives that are trying to fill in the void that will, or that can eventually make it a functioning community.
I want to pick up on something that you said a few moments ago about like part of the reason that it's a community, non-community is that not everyone is conscious of the shared heritage here. You do some tour guiding. How do you think about supporting the Hungarian Jewish community to be aware of the physical spaces that carry the history and what we share that is still standing today?
That's being conscious of what you have around you. Is, I think, a part of the heritage you have to understand the space you live in and the various dimensions of the space you live in. And also, sort of relating to one of your earlier questions, I am tour guiding. I started tour guiding, again, for reasons of underfunded Hungarian academia. And I learned so much from what I am doing as a tour guide of myself and the surroundings, and becoming conscious of identity choices that are visible in the buildings we have around us. And I'm really passionate of helping others understand this, and especially appreciate this, that we have a built heritage, we have a lot of objects around us that tell stories, and it is our responsibility to hear those stories and to retell those stories.
And I feel like the physical space that we live in is easy for people to connect to in some ways. It can make life so much more meaningful if in your day-to-day you can interact with your heritage.
And also, if you understand something, like if you understand a building, if you understand an item, like whatever random family heirloom, if it's, I don't know, a diamond tiara, you're obviously going to cherish it. But if it's a wooden something or a semi-broken little vessel, you might just dump it. But if you understand the story behind the objects, or if you can read the buildings, then you're going to care for it. Then your responsibility is going to be different. And your connection to it is going to be different as well. And I think that's also really important in shaping your identity and shaping who you are. Because in many ways it is unconscious, how it defines us, but the visual world around us does define our moods, does define our connections, etc.
Do you have any special connection to any Hungarian countryside communities that have historic jewel boxes of Jewish history? Or you focus on Budapest?
I focus on Budapest because this is where I live. So this is where I spend my everyday life. And in that sense, that's the obvious thing to focus on. But I do travel the countryside a lot. I also tour guide on the countryside. And I think I can get passionate about any building. And that's one of the things I've learned, to notice the small details. And it might sound a bit weird or ridiculous, but even in the Dohány synagogue, which is like the synagogue that every Hungarian Jew knows, or we hope, or at least knows about, or whatever. And I've been there a zillion times. Every single time I go, I notice a new detail. And the same with like the synagogue that I do go to every week. There are new details that I notice, and I think it is very interesting in that sense. And then I can become really passionate about them.
Nice.
Sometimes a bit ridiculous for my surroundings, how passionate I can become of a tiny detail.
You mean for the people around you?
Yeah, for the people around me, yes. Okay, she again noticed
no bother.
An inscription there.
Now I want to understand how these experiences in your academic life and in the community influence your current role and thinking as a leader of the Jewish University here in Budapest. So we already spoke with Gabor a bit, and I'm also excited to hear how you articulate the role of the university differently. So I'll start by asking, why is a Jewish university, this Jewish university, relevant to the community?
Well, first of all, it does have a really long history,
and the building,
and it has the building as well as the university date back to 1877. So it's like 149 years old institution, which has been functioning continuously for 149 years, except for basically a 10-month period in 44-45. The building has been there and has been in use, and the use is very visible on the building, so it's not in the best state currently.
Okay.
So first of all, there is the heritage of the institution, which I think is very important. And it's a heritage that also bears responsibility. When the institution was founded 149 years ago, or when they started planning it, more than that, the vision was to create an institution that provides relevant knowledge to students who study there, in order to enable them to form and build the Jewish community in the region. And I think both Gabor and I share that vision, although it means different things now. Like every single element of what I said has a different meaning today than it did 149 years ago. But especially in the situation that the community is in now, that we spoke about, that it is a community but not a community, that there is a lack of or a need for, or a void that has to be filled in many ways. I think the responsibility of the university or the relevance of the university is its responsibility to be able to provide future Jewish leadership in many ways, in not just, I mean, it's a Jewish university and a rabbinical seminary, so obviously, yes, rabbis, obviously, yes, cantors, but that's a minuscule part of what the university has to do and what there is to do. So one of my, I mean, it is a part of my goals with the university to create programs that are going to be modern and relevant, or that already are modern and relevant, and to teach students to be able to take on responsibility for all parts of what it means to have a Jewish community with a long history and heritage.
Preparing leaders with this proper grounding.
Preparing leaders with this proper grounding for the various roles that one needs. And that can be a lot of things. That can be heritage protection. That can be education. It can be informal education. It can be social work. It can be community building. There are so many aspects that are there, outreach, Jewish, non-Jewish relations, theology, identity, like all these parts where I think if the university manages, and that's what we have been working on the past 3 years, to become a background or a backbone of this, then I think that's what we should do, and that's what we have to do.
All these different like areas of focus or areas of expertise that a community needs to thrive that you're saying, I feel like in this moment of my life, I'm trying to figure out which of these focuses is the right next step for me. So
all of them are great, right?
All of them are great. And
all of them are
great that one place can serve this many purposes. Whatever your interest is in the Jewish world, you're trying for the university to be able to provide the grounding and foundation for that focus.
And I think it's also for all of us, our Jewish identity is not a stable thing. It changes with our life, and it changes like life situation, political situation, locality where we are, our immediate friend group, our community, etc. And in that sense, it is great because all of us have all of it in us. But in order for the community to be functioning, and that's a way of maturity, that you have to know that you have to specialize, or you have to start specializing, and all of these will have to match up. You cannot be the perfect, passionate part of everything. You have to choose which part is good for you, be the best of you, and be able to collaborate with the others who do the other parts of the patchwork.
It's a hard, soul-searching task for me right now. And I mean, for a community as large and diverse as the Hungarian Jewish community, I guess you can feel hopeful that there will be people that want to take on these positions and choose their niche. Hopefully they choose to come to the university.
Well, yes, that's our challenge. So that's what we are trying to reach. And yeah.
It's not to be taken for granted that a university that's been around for 149 years, neolog institution, has a woman in the leadership. What opportunities and challenges does that pose for you?
It's actually a really interesting question in many ways. I'm not really sure anyone in the neolog movement knows what neolog means. And I think that's the university is a neolog university, was founded as the Neolog Rabbinical Seminary, but I don't think either one of the rabbis could define what neolog was, and even if they did an attempt, there would be no two neolog rabbis who would agree on what neolog was. it is important for us as a university to give the knowledge and the tools into the hands of the future leadership of the community to help them define who they are. And whether it's now-log or not, or what now-log means, or what now-log, we sort of know what, I'm also not really sure we know what now-log meant in the 19th century, but we definitely don't know what it means in the 21st century. So try to figure that out. And obviously the gender issue is one of the things that the Hungarian Jewish community has to tackle with. In a way, Hungarian society has to tackle with that as well. I think the one thing that all now-log rabbis would agree on is that a woman cannot be a rabbi. Like the one common denominator in now-log Judaism that's my impression. So I think it's a really interesting factor that if you look at the rabbinical seminary, one of the three leadership positions is a woman, which is a unique and important step. But also the head of the Jewish Museum is a woman. The director of the Rumbach Synagogue is a woman. So there are a lot of, and I could go on, the head of the Scheiber School is a woman. So there are a lot of women in leadership positions, which I think is a really interesting sign of the fact that there is change. Although from an American perspective, it might not be a visible change, but from inside, I think it is a really important change. And I think all of us who are women in leadership positions within the Jewish community today, we can say that we are respected for what we do, and there is a time for everything. And I have to say that when I started my academic career or my active Jewish community life, it wasn't obvious that there would be women in intellectually important leading positions. And I think that is a great achievement in a way that it is definitely a huge change to what I saw in the 90s. If I don't want to be the revolutionary fighter for women rights and equality, then what I have seen or what I've experienced is that I can actually reach a lot further, if that's not the flagship topic.
So, speaking of positive change and progress, that in the early days of your career, there were, compared to now, there were not women in leading intellectually important positions like there are today. We just passed a historic weekend in Hungary. The Orban government was voted out, and I'm hearing from my Hungarian people that it is the most exciting, important thing happened in Hungary since the democratic change in '89. What are you hoping is possible for the Jewish community in Hungary with this change?
It's a very hard question because if I want to, in my ideal world, the political surroundings should not influence the stability of a Jewish community. And in a way, I hope that it can become possible that political division lines, and it might be a utopistic, absolutely ideal pink cloud, whatever vision I have, that the community should be strong enough and not in order to withstand political changes around it. In a way, it is always easy to form a unity if you have the common enemy. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see whether not having the common enemy, whether verbalizing it or not verbalizing it, but that has been something that at least within the Jewish community, or at least within the Jewish community that I know, it has been a common understanding that the Orban regime has serious issues that we cannot identify with. Once you don't have that, what happens? So I think it will be a really, really interesting period within the Jewish community, in that sense, internally. And one of the things that I think has been really interesting and very hard for many of us who have political consciousness and involvement and activities, etc., and definite priorities, is the post-October 7th world that, despite all our gut feelings about so many things of the Orban regime, the fact that in Hungary to be a Jew on the street, the feeling didn't change. Our level of security has been just like before October 7th. And I think that in many of us, there is a deep fear of that situation changing, which is a big political factor in many ways.
This is one of the few places in the world that to be a Jew in the street, the feeling hasn't changed from before October 7th.
Yeah, so I think that's, politically, that is a big question of what will happen. We are hoping for the best, which is like the actual everyday life, and it does influence our everyday life. But then on the other hand, I think it is it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes. Also, if you are close to community leadership, one of the huge challenges is that Jewish communities have always, throughout history, have always had to negotiate with the power. You are a diaspora, a minority community, and you have to survive. So community leadership has to negotiate. And it's harder to negotiate with people you don't like than with people you might like. Or if you are not among the leadership, to see that people talk with people you hate, how you feel about your leaders if you see them on an everyday contact with those who you passionately dislike. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see whether there is a change and what type of a change there is. And it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for community leadership, the political negotiators that until now they could not speak with the Orban government. And then the community in general didn't like them speaking with the Orban government, but if you are the community leader, you do have to do that. And now that that's gone, whether they can live with it or take it for their advantage or not, I think it's going to be really, really interesting in that sense.
If the Jewish community leaders will also have more freedom in how they communicate with the government, with the power.
That too, but if I look at it from a different perspective, one of the zillion issues that Hungarian Jews, and then I consciously don't speak about Jewish community, has is that the Jewish community doesn't represent the majority of Hungarian Jews. Or the majority of Jews in Hungary do not feel any affiliation with the established federation. The established federation at the same time has to act as a political factor that does represent them. But then if they do with the government that the community or the Jews typically don't like, then it's going to push the Jews further away from the federation. And I think now is an opportunity, and whether they can take it or they can't is, I think, extremely interesting.
I want to think more about what you're saying about like a Jewish community ideally should be strong enough to withstand political change and like not have to make or break or what. And at the same time, that kind of feels like a contradiction to the fact that if we're a minority and we need to be like advocating for our protection or needs with the power, then at the same time, of course, we have to like shift the way that we represent ourselves depending on the power. So that's a interesting question.
That's why I said that it's this ideal world that I discussed. But yeah, I think if you're secure enough in your identity, then it's really easy to navigate. And that's where the challenge is, whether you're secure enough.
For listeners who maybe are struggling with their Jewish identity or insecure about their Jewishness in a moment of crisis for many Jewish communities in North America, do you have any advice for people who may be struggling or insecure with their Jewish identity, how they can find their connecting point, find their security?
I think if I want to be the Eastern European cynical part, I think struggling with our identity is the strongest part of your identity. So if you struggle with it, if you tackle the questions, that already means that you have your Jewish identity. And I don't think there is a prescribed answer to what it should be. I really passionately believe that you cannot look away because it's going to pop up in unexpected places. I think that's what you should do. You should tackle the questions. You should tackle your priorities. What is more important for me? Is human rights? Is what you feel about Israeli politics? What you feel about American politics? If you think about the world politics around you and your gut feelings might go instinctively against your love of Israel, verbalize it, think about it, read about it, talk about it, because tackling it is the only way you can deal with it.
Thank you. I think that is a really, really great place to end. Thank you for this really enjoyable conversation, Szonja.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great. It was wonderful. Thank you.